She didn't fly to the Bahamas to cry. She flew there to catch a lie. 28 years old. No badge. No subpoena. No law enforcement authority of any kind. Just a daughter who had been watching a marriage from the inside for her entire life and had 5 very specific questions she needed a place called the Bahamas to answer. And when she came home, she wasn't carrying an arrest. She wasn't carrying a body. She was carrying something harder to dismiss than either of those things. She was carrying a sentence. 15 words. Said on camera. With her own name attached. And those 15 words have done something that 2 law enforcement agencies, a federal investigation, multiple national news outlets, and weeks of professional search and rescue operations have not yet been able to do. They have made the only available explanation for what happened to Lynette Hooker impossible to accept. This is the story of how a daughter went to test a story and came back with a question nobody can answer. Lynette Hooker was 56 years old when she disappeared on the night of April 4th. She had been sailing for more than a decade. 4 years before her disappearance, she had sold her Michigan home to live full-time on a sailboat. She and her husband Brian had spent years moving through the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. They had been in the Bahamas since February. Their social media feed, run under the name The Sailing Hookers, showed a couple on paddleboards in Marsh Harbor, a couple posting sail life hashtags from deck chairs, a couple documenting the kind of retirement dream that other people pin to vision boards and never reach. To anyone looking in from the outside, this was a happy couple on a happy boat living a life most people only imagine. Carly Ellsworth had been looking from the inside. She is Lynette's daughter from a previous relationship. She was 4 years old when Brian Hooker married her mother. She has known this man for 24 years. And by her own account, given across multiple on-the-record interviews with CNN, ABC News, NBC News, and her local Michigan station WZZM-13, the public version of the marriage and the private version had stopped matching each other long before April 4th. The call came on a Sunday night. Brian called her from the Bahamas. It was around 9 in the evening. His voice, she told NBC News, was monotone. Relaxed. He said, "Yeah, your mom's missing," and that was essentially that. She later told CNN the call came somewhere between 8 and 8:30. The man on the other end was a man she had known for nearly her entire life. And the voice that came through that phone did not sound, to a stepdaughter of that much tenure, like a man whose wife had just drowned. That was the first thing a daughter knew that no reporter could know. You cannot fact-check a tone of voice unless you have 24 years of baseline data on the person producing it. Carly had that baseline. And what she heard did not fit. Then came the voicemail. Brian left her a recording that both CBS News and Fox News Digital obtained. In it, he told her that search and rescue had recovered the flotation device he had thrown to her mother. He called her honey. He said he loved her. He wrapped up and hung up. Carly played that voicemail for reporters because she wanted the country to hear what she had heard. And what she heard was a man delivering a logistical update. Not a husband. Not a man in crisis. The cadence of the recording, in her reading of it, belonged to someone describing the weather. Not someone describing the last place he saw his wife alive. She flew to the Bahamas with her boyfriend. She did not fly alone. But the questions she carried were entirely hers. And there were 5 of them. The first question was about the water itself. Brian's account of what happened that night required a specific kind of ocean. Water capable of sweeping an experienced swimmer away from a dinghy. Water deep enough and violent enough to separate a physically fit woman from a floating device thrown to her. Water dark and moving enough to hide a body from every search team that had been looking for weeks. That is a very specific description of a very specific kind of water. Carly wanted to stand next to it and see whether it matched. It did not. She met with the Royal Bahamas Police Force. She met with the US Coast Guard. She asked to board the sailboat her mother had been living on, the vessel named the Soulmate, for the first time since her mother vanished. They let her. And then she went out on the water with local help and retraced as closely as a living person can retrace the route Brian said they had taken from the Abaco Inn on Elbow Key toward their anchored yacht. What she saw was not ocean. It was channel. A local charter captain named Monstein, who took Fox News Digital along this same return route, described the water in precise terms. In the channel the hookers would have been traveling. Depth runs as shallow as 4 feet at low tide and approximately 10 feet at high tide. 4 feet does not drown a standing woman. 10 feet does not hide one. Monstein also said shore lights from the islands remain visible from the water even at night. A person separated from a boat in that channel would still see land. Would still be able to orient themselves. would still, in water that shallow, potentially be able to touch the bottom. Carly told News 8, the Grand Rapids station would TV, that where her mother supposedly fell in, her mother could have swum a few feet and stood up. That is what the geography told her. Brian's account required ocean. What she found was a narrow, clear, shallow, watched body of water crossed by boats, overlooked by resorts, and visible from a coastline of rental homes and docks. His account required a rip current powerful enough to carry his wife out of his reach. What the visual record and every local expert offered was water clear enough to see the bottom. His account required invisibility. What the geography offered was a stretch of water that is, by every measure, seen. The first question broke on contact with the first place. The second question was about time. Brian's original account placed the couple's departure from the Abaco in at approximately 7:30 in the evening. That detail mattered enormously. It let him say the sun had set. It let him say that darkness had taken his wife from him. The explanation for how an experienced mariner vanishes without a trace leans, in his telling, on the failure of visibility. Night made it happen. Dark water made it irreversible. Then the footage arrived. Reporting by Ashley Banfield on her podcast Drop Dead Serious obtained imagery showing the couple leaving the Abaco Inn and heading toward the water at closer to 6:40 in the evening. That is not a small correction. At 6:40 on April 4th in the Bahamas, sun had not yet set. The sky was still light. Sunset in the Abaco Islands in early April falls within minutes on either side of 7:30. A 6:40 departure puts the dinghy in the water with nearly a full hour of usable daylight remaining. A 7:30 departure puts it in the water as light ends. These are not interchangeable timelines. They describe completely different physical conditions. Jim Todd, a volunteer with Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue, who was one of the first people to meet Brian the morning after, told Banfield what the revised timestamp meant in plain terms. The first version of the story ran from dusk into dark. The revised version ran from daylight into dusk. "You do not," he said, "simply lose sight of a person in daylight water." Ken, a 38-year-old bartender at the Abaco Inn who served Brian that afternoon, told the New York Post the couple had arrived around 4:30. Brian ordered 2 rum and cokes. Barely spoke. Ken knows the local waterways. He said the travel times in Brian's story did not line up with how long the trip between Elbow Key and Marsh Harbor actually takes. He said it was strange that Brian ended up in Marsh Harbor and no one along the way, on either side of the channel, saw the wife. And then there is the gap. Brian says he departed at some point in the evening. He arrived at the Marsh Harbor boatyard at approximately 4 in the morning. That is a window of somewhere between 8 and 9 hours in clear water, a quarter to half a mile from an island with visible shore lights on 3 sides, with no emergency signal sent and no help summoned until the very end. He told a friend in a recorded phone call obtained by Fox News Digital that he yelled for his wife for about an hour. That leaves roughly 8 hours. In those 8 hours, a man with a paddle, a dinghy, visible shore lights on multiple sides of a narrow channel, and a cell phone that had been working at the Abaco Inn bar a few hours earlier, moved slowly toward a destination that was not the nearest available help. No distress call was placed. No flare went up. No signal of any kind was reported by any Abaco Inn staffer, any nearby boater, or any resident of the rental homes along the coastline in that entire window. 8 silent hours. That is the second seam in the story. Both seams are loose. Neither has been tightened by anything his attorneys have offered since. The third question was about what the cameras captured. A photograph surfaced showing Lynette at the Abaco Inn at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon on April 4th. She is seated. She is wearing a green bathing suit cover-up. That detail matters because Brian, in his descriptions to searchers, told rescue volunteers that his wife had been wearing a black two-piece. He did not mention the green cover-up. A search and rescue volunteer told Banfield the omission was not a small thing. A green garment changes the visual signature of a body in water. It changes the odds of spotting someone from a boat, from a drone, from a shoreline. Searchers operating in the first critical hours were looking for a black swimsuit, not a green cover-up. Whatever the reason for that gap, the practical effect was that the people scanning the water for Lynette Hooker were scanning for the wrong piece of clothing. A second image released by Banfield showed a figure appearing to be Brian Hooker walking alone toward the dock from the Abaco Inn, carrying a yellow dry bag that has since become a recognizable detail of this case. The photograph shows one person, not two. A man with his bag. No wife at his side. The picture does not on its own prove anything about the minutes that followed. But it is a frame that does not fit the narrative of a couple departing together on a dinghy under difficult conditions. It is a frame of a husband moving alone. And then there is the water itself in the visual record. Banfield obtained and released video of the Sea of Abaco from that same evening. The water was flat, calm, not the violent conditions Brian had described as the backdrop of his wife's disappearance. His own voicemail acknowledged they had stayed too long and had no life jackets. But the conditions themselves, on the contemporaneous record, did not support an accidental ejection from a small boat. A small boat on a flat evening sea moving through a well-marked channel with a visibly quiet horizon is not the theater of a sudden fatal fall unless something inside the boat changes the equation. The third question sharpened everything. What Lynette was wearing is not what Brian told rescuers she was wearing. The image of the couple walking together to the dinghy that his story implies is not the image the record captured. The image the record captured is of him alone. The sea conditions he blamed for the loss of his wife are not the sea conditions that were photographed in the hour she supposedly went overboard. The fourth question was one only a family member could answer. It was about the context of the marriage itself. And this is where the reporting hits a register that no national outlet can independently access because it requires proximity over decades. Lynette's mother, Dolene Hamlet, sat down with Ashley Banfield and said her daughter had recently bought a one-way ticket home to Miami. She had been planning to leave. Brian. That information, offered by the missing woman's mother on the record in a named interview, reframes the entire question of what April 4th was inside this marriage. It was not a random Saturday on the water. By Dolene's account, it was a weekend inside a countdown. Dolene described a marriage with serious lows. She described a pattern of her daughter leaving Brian and coming back, leaving Brian and coming back. She said alcohol turned him hostile. When Brian drank, he could be mean, hateful, say unpleasant things. And she said it also got physical. Carly had her own parallel testimony. She told WZZM13 that alcohol had been a problem in her mother's marriage. That arguments escalated when the couple drank. And that the couple had recently been drinking more after being sober for roughly a year and a half. That detail, the return to drinking after an extended sober stretch, is the kind of specific that cannot be produced by a reporter. It can only come from someone inside the family's knowledge base. Underneath all of that were two older pieces of documented history. A 2015 Michigan incident in which Brian and Lynette both accused each other of assault, with a warrant denied because prosecutors could not determine who had started it. A 2006 Michigan child abuse charge against Brian, for which he was acquitted by a jury. Court records. Not rumors. Not allegations without paper behind them. Context with documentation. The fourth question produced a picture his legal defense cannot easily answer. The woman he says drowned in an accident had, according to her own mother, been preparing to walk out of the marriage. And when the man released from police custody chose between staying on the island to search for his wife and flying home, he flew home. One day after his release. His attorney framed it around a sick mother. His own words to ABC News the day before had been that his only focus was finding his wife. By the time those words were aired, he was boarding a plane. The fifth question was behavioral. What does a man who has just watched his wife fall overboard actually do? Brian's own answers, given in a recorded phone call obtained by Fox News Digital, were disordered in a way that is hard to explain as grief. He told a friend he threw the anchor out last instead of first. He said he could not really explain why. He said that by the time the anchor was set, he was somewhere between a quarter and a half a mile away from where his wife had gone in. He said he yelled for her for about an hour. Read those choices in sequence. A dinghy loses its passenger overboard. The engine key was with the person who went into the water. The engine is now dead. A responsible person's first instinct is to fix the position of the dinghy so it does not drift away from the person in the water. The anchor is the tool for that job. Throwing it in first stops the drift. Throwing it in last, after the dinghy has already traveled a quarter to half a mile in whatever current exists, maximizes the distance from the person you are trying to help. On Brian's own telling, he did the second thing. Then he paddled. He did not paddle toward Elbow Key, which was near, which has a dock, rental houses, a marina, and a volunteer fire and rescue service. He paddled toward Marsh Harbor across a longer stretch of open water, arriving hours later at a yard where he could finally make the report. The route he chose was the longer one. No distress call. No flare. No signal of any kind across a coastline with residents, boats, and resorts capable of responding. Carly's CNN question is the structural critique of all of it. If he had dropped the anchor first, he would have stayed near his wife. If he had paddled toward the nearest shore, he would have reached help faster. His own voice on the voicemail the next morning, delivering an update about the flotation device being recovered, did not sound in her reading like a husband who might be losing his wife. It sounded like a man giving a briefing. That is the pattern the fifth question produced. Not a case. Not a conviction. A pattern. And in that pattern, the specific shape of grief was absent. Now stack all five. The water cannot do what his account requires it to do. The timeline produces 8 unaccounted hours and a daylight departure that dismantles his visibility excuse. The visual record shows him alone, shows his wife in a green cover-up he did not disclose, and shows a flat sea on an evening he blamed for rough conditions. The family context shows a wife who had bought a one-way ticket home and a marriage that her own mother described as one she had feared for. The behavioral record shows a man who anchored last, paddled the long way, sent no signal, and was on a flight out of the country within 24 hours of his release from police questioning. And sitting on top of all five is the sentence Carly delivered on camera to ABC News. 15 words. Said with her own name attached. She said, "I don't understand how she drowned or got floated away." Read that carefully. She did not say she did not understand how her mother drowned. She named both possibilities Brian's account allows for. The drowning. The current carrying her away. She named both and rejected both in a single breath. Because she had stood in that water. She had seen the channel. She had spoken to the captain who runs it every working day. She had seen the footage of the flat sea. She had retraced the route. And what she found is that neither explanation is compatible with the physical place where it supposedly happened. So the question that sits on top of everything else is not a technical question. It is arithmetic. If the water did not do it, and the timeline does not hold, and he was alone in the photograph, and her mother was leaving him, and he did not act like a man whose wife had just drowned, then how is her mother gone? Her mother is not in Michigan. Not on the Soulmate. Not on Elbow Key. Not in any hospital on any record anywhere in the Bahamas. She is gone. Carly is not denying that. She is naming the precise gap in the only available explanation for how that absence came to be. Within the framework Brian has offered, the fall, the current, the flotation device, the long paddle to Marsh Harbor, there is no mechanism by which a living, experienced, physically capable swimmer disappears completely from 4 to 10 feet of clear, shallow, watched water. Somewhere the framework is broken. That is what the 15 words say. And it is the only thing they say. Brian Hooker has not been charged. He was arrested on April 8th in Grand Bahama, questioned for roughly 3 hours, and released on April 13th after prosecutors recommended against filing charges at that time, citing the ongoing investigation. His Bahamas-based attorney Tel Butler has stated he denies any wrongdoing categorically and unequivocally. His Michigan-based attorney Crystal Marie Hauser has asked the public to extend the benefit of the doubt, has stated there is no evidence supporting the allegations made by Carly and Olene, and has asserted he would never have harmed his wife of roughly 25 years. Those are his formal positions on the record. But the investigative system has moved. ABC News, citing a source familiar with the matter, reported that the investigation into whether any wrongdoing occurred is being led by the United States Coast Guard. A criminal file is open on the American side. The question of intent in Lynette Hooker's disappearance now sits in front of a federal American investigator as well as a Bahamian one. Brian is described in public reporting as a suspect. He has not been charged. That distinction is real and must stay real for as long as it is accurate. But the public record against him has grown steadily since his release. Carly flew home with a headband on her head that had belonged to her mother. A gold L-shaped necklace Lynette had worn almost every day. A picture frame Carly herself had made. A piece of fabric her grandmother had sewn by hand. She boarded the Soulmate and sat in the space where her mother's clothes still hung, where her mother's mugs were still on the shelf, where every small handmade thing that turns a floating vessel into a home was still exactly where her mother had placed it. She told ABC News she kept expecting her mother to walk out of a corner of the cabin. She came home without an arrest. Without a body. Without a resolution of any kind that the law would recognize. She came home with 5 tests run, 5 answers recorded, and 1 sentence that no one on the other side of this case has yet found a way to explain. The water is shallow. The shore was close. The sea was calm. The photograph shows 1 person. The timeline has 8 missing hours. The anchor went in last. The green cover-up went undisclosed. The ticket home was one way. And the man who said his only focus was finding his wife was on a plane out of